Good day, class. So for today's lesson, we will discuss Module 4, State, Nation, and Globalization. So at the end of our lesson, you will be able to define state and nation, differentiate state from nation, explain the meaning of globalization, and evaluate how globalization influences nation states. State, nation, and globalizations defined. The scientific study of politics deals with the state as a political entity. It is defined as a community of people living permanently in a definite territory. A politically organized sovereign community and independent of outside control bound side of nationhood. And a body of politics organized of a common consent for mutual defense and mutual safety and to promote general welfare. So in addition to this, political entities are systems of governing authority. A state is a region ruled by one particular government. So the types of political entities includes the nations, states, or a combination of a nation and states, or a stateless nations, multinational states, multi-state nations, and autonomous regions. Powers to a government as may be necessary for common protection lead to the people in the state of nature, but by a nation embodied in an organized state. Elements of state. The elements of state are people, territory, government, and sovereignty. So we have the first element, the people. People, also known as citizen or nationality of a given country, is what constitutes the state itself. What makes them, however, a community of people is their common aspiration to achieve a happy life, which in the wording of the Philippine constitutions through the establishment of a just and humane society. So people in a given state is very important because they form population. So if there is no people, there is no politics involved. There is no population that will occur, and it is impossible for a state to exist if there is no people. The state exercises supreme authority over them to its government. So there is no definite limit for the size of populations of people essential for a given state. Next, we have the territory. Territory is a definite place where the people permanently live or reside. It includes land, space, and the territorial sea. It must be definite in that its bounds and limits are clearly defined. No fixed size of territory is required as to constitute a state. Nevertheless, it must be such size as sufficient to support the needs of the people in terms of whatever resources that can be inherently be found from the said territory. So in addition to this, territory is also important because in the international law, jurisdiction, which is an attribute of state sovereignty, is exercised primarily on territorial basis. And also, the territory is one of the attributes of a state. The geographical location and topography of a given territory may also affect relatively the lives of the people. Indeed, geography to a certain extent determines the way of life of the people. So this explains that the geography shapes or the topographical characteristic of a given area shapes the culture, the tradition, and the daily life of the people. It includes also the climate, weather, and the whole environment with all the natural and mineral resources found therein. So in addition to this, a topography is a detailed map of the surface features of a land. We have the national territory. The national territory comprises the Philippine Archipelago with all the islands and waters embraced therein, and all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty for jurisdiction, consisting of its terrestrial, fluvial, and aerial domains, including its territorial sea, the seabed, the subsoil, the insular shelves, and other submarine areas. So the value of provision defining our national territory is very necessary. It is important to know so that we and the other nations would know the boundaries of our country. The Philippines can promulgate and enforce its laws within our country, and other areas included the Philippine Archipelago. Next, we have the archipelagic doctrine. Being an archipelago, the Philippines subscribes to a territorial principles subscribed by almost, if not all, archipelagos the world over. This is known as archipelagic doctrine, which is measured at 3 miles from the shores towards the sea at low tide beginning at the most outer island in all direction, from which a straight imaginary line is drawn, whereby all water within the said imaginary line around between and connecting the islands regardless of their breadth and dimension or distance form one another, form part of the internal waters as our territorial sea. Okay, so in addition to this, the archipelagic doctrine, as stated in Article 1 of the 1987 Constitution, provides that an archipelago shall be regarded as a single unit. Okay, as a single unit, so that the waters around, between, and connecting the islands of the archipelago will be respected for their specific dimension and breadth. It also includes the internal waters of the state. Next, we have the economic zone. So this refers to the portion of the water measured 200 miles from the imaginary line towards the sea, over which we have the exclusive right to exploit marine resources. This economic zone is not part of the Philippine territory. However, this is a matter of politics. That is, if we have military power to enforce this right as against other countries like Malaysia, China, and some neighboring countries. Next, we have the land territory. The Philippines is an archipelago consisting of more than 7,000 islands and islets stretching almost 1,000 miles from north to south. The land surface is 114,830 square miles and is creased with mountains and drained by small rivers and systems. Volcanic in origin, the mountain ranges forms the circuit and watersheds of a Pacific basin of the Earth's surface. Specifically, our land territory is constituted of the following. So we have the number one, those ceded to the United States by virtue of the Treaty of December 10, 1898. those defined in the treaty concluded between the United States and Spain on November 7, 1900, which were not defined in the Treaty of Paris, specifically the islands of Cagayan, Sulu, and Cebuto. Those defined in the treaty concluded on January 2, 1980, between the United States and the Great Britain, specifically the Turtle and Monkey Island. The islands of Batanes, which has covered under a general statement in the 1935 Constitution, and those contemplated in the phrase belonging top the Philippines by historic right or legal title in the 1973 Constitution. So in addition to this, the fundamental position of the Philippines is that the limits of its national territory are the boundaries laid down in the 1898 Treaty of Paris, which acceded the Philippines from Spain to the US or the United States. The position of the Philippine government is contested in the international community and runs against rules in the Law of the Sea Convention, which the Philippines signed and ratified. Because of this, our national territory will be constituted and will be comprised of the Philippine Archipelago with all the islands and waters embraced therein, and all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction.